In the deep and dreaming heart of the world, when the land of Britain was a patchwork of green forests and silver rivers, stitched together with mist, there was a time of great shadow and greater longing. The old kings were gone, and the land ached for a steady hand, a true heart to guide it. The wind that whispered through the ancient oaks and tumbled over the standing stones seemed to carry a single, sorrowful question. Who will be our king? In this age of uncertainty, there lived a man who was older than the oldest trees and wiser than the deepest rivers. His name was Merlin. He was not merely a man of flesh and bone, but a part of the land itself. His beard was like the gray moss that clung to the northern sides of stones, and his eyes held the twinkling, far-off light of the stars. He could hear the thoughts of the badger in its set, and understand the silent language of the growing grass. He felt the pain of the land as if it were his own, and he knew that a great destiny was stirring, like a seed deep in the winter earth, waiting for the first touch of spring. The king at this time was Uther Pendragon, a man of fire and storm, whose heart was a battleground of great passions. He ruled with a strong arm, but his strength could not heal the divisions in the kingdom. His gaze fell upon the Lady Igraine, the wife of the Duke of Cornwall, and he was consumed by a love so fierce it threatened to burn the world down around him. It was a troubled love, born of a troubled time, but Merlin, who could see the threads of fate that weave the world together, saw in this tangled knot the beginning of a golden thread. He went to Uther under a moon as thin and sharp as a silver sickle. "Your love can bring forth a king," Merlin said, his voice the rustle of dry leaves. "A king of light and peace, the like of which this land has never known. But this child cannot be raised in the shadow of a crown, nor in the turmoil of a court. He must be given to me. He must grow as the oak grows, rooted in the simple earth, so that he may one day be strong enough to touch the sky." And so it was done. Through Merlin's subtle arts, a night of magic and enchantment passed, and in the fullness of time, a child was born. He came into the world not with a cry of alarm, but with a soft sigh, as if he were already dreaming of the world he would one day build. A new star blazed in the heavens on the night of his birth, and the sea whispered a name upon the shore, a name that the waves would remember forever. Arthur. Before the babe could even be named by his mother, Merlin arrived, wrapped in a cloak of shadows and starlight. He took the child gently in his arms. The baby did not weep, but looked up at the wizard's ancient eyes with a gaze of deep and peaceful understanding. Merlin carried him away from the cold stone walls of the castle, out into the living, breathing world. He traveled through sleeping forests and over misty hills to a small, quiet manor, a place of warmth and simple goodness, where lived a knight named Sir Ector. Sir Ector was a man whose heart was as sturdy and honest as the oak table in his hall. He and his wife had a young son named Kay, a boy with a quick temper and a good, if sometimes hidden, heart. They knew nothing of the baby's royal blood. Merlin told them only that the child was special, and that they were to raise him as their own, to teach him not the ways of a prince, but the ways of a good man. And so Arthur's life began. Not in a cradle of gold, but in a simple wooden one, rocked by a loving hand. He was not called Prince, but simply Arthur, or sometimes, affectionately, the Wart, by his older brother Kay, for he was small and seemed to always be underfoot. He grew up not with the clash of swords for a lullaby, but with the lowing of cattle and the song of the lark. His days were filled with the small, important magics of childhood. He learned the satisfying heft of a wood axe, the warmth of fresh bread from the oven, the joy of a dog's loyal companionship. He ran through fields of barley that tickled his chin, and he lay on his back in summer meadows, watching the clouds drift like great, slow ships across the endless ocean of the sky. He learned that kindness to a horse or a hound was a virtue, and that a shared loaf of bread with a hungry traveler was a feast. Kay, being older and the true son of Sir Ector, was trained in the arts of knighthood. He practiced with the sword and the lance, his movements clumsy at first, then growing more sure. Arthur was his squire, tending to his armor, polishing his shield until it shone like a captured piece of the sun. He watched Kay's lessons with wide, curious eyes, but he felt no envy. His own lessons were of a different, quieter kind. Often, when the world was hushed and dreaming, Merlin would come to him. He never arrived in a crash of thunder or a puff of smoke. Sometimes, Arthur would be fishing by the river, and the kindly old man sitting next to him on the bank, the one who seemed to know the name of every fish and the story of every stone, would turn out to be Merlin. Other times, a hawk would land on his wrist, its eyes impossibly wise, and it would speak to him in a voice that was both the wind and Merlin's own, teaching him of the world from a great height. Merlin did not teach him sums or histories from dusty books. He taught him the deep magic of the world. One sun-drenched afternoon, as Arthur sat sadly by the castle moat, Merlin appeared and, with a gentle tap and a whispered word, turned him into a tiny perch. He swam through the cool, green, watery world, learning what it was to be small and hunted, to feel the current as a mighty, invisible hand guiding him. He learned that even the smallest creature has its own kingdom, its own fears, and its own courage. Another time, to teach him of perspective, Merlin transformed him into a swift Merlin hawk. He soared high above the castle, his boyhood home, now just a speck in a vast tapestry of green and gold. He saw the world not as a collection of separate things, but as one great, interconnected whole. He saw the fox in the woods, the farmer in his field, the river flowing to the sea, all part of the same beautiful, intricate dance. He learned that a king must see not just his own castle, but the entire kingdom, and feel the life of it all. Through these gentle, wondrous lessons, Arthur's heart grew. He learned empathy from being a fish, perspective from being a bird, and diligence from being an ant, toiling with his fellows to build a home. He learned that true strength was not in the power to command, but in the wisdom to understand. He grew tall and strong, his hair the color of ripe wheat, and his eyes the clear, honest gray of a dawn sky. He was humble and kind, quick to laugh, and slow to anger, and the animals of the forest knew him as a friend. Years passed, like the turning of the seasons. King Uther Pendragon faded from the world, and the land, left without a true ruler, fell deeper into strife. The great lords and powerful knights vied for the throne, their ambitions clashing like swords in the dark, and the common folk suffered, praying for the promised king to come. Merlin, feeling the time was near, went to the archbishop in the great city of Londinium. He told him to gather all the nobles and knights of the realm on Christmas morning, for a miracle would show them their rightful king. And so, in the churchyard of the grandest cathedral, a marvel appeared overnight. There stood a great, square block of marble, and driven deep into it was an anvil of solid steel. And plunged into the anvil, right to its hilt, was a magnificent sword. The blade shone with an inner light, and on the stone below letters of gold were inscribed, which read, "Whoso pulleth this sword from this stone and anvil is right wise king born of all England." A great murmur went through the crowd. One by one, the strongest and proudest knights of the realm strode forward. They were men of fearsome reputation, their muscles like knotted ropes. They wrapped their hands around the golden hilt and they pulled. They strained until their faces were purple, until the veins stood out on their necks like cords. But the sword did not move. It was as if it were not merely set in the stone, but was part of it, grown there like a strange, glittering tree. After many had tried and all had failed, it was decided to hold a great tournament on New Year's Day, so that knights from every corner of the land could come and try their luck. Sir Ector traveled to the tournament with his son, Sir Kay, who had recently been knighted. And with them, of course, came Arthur, his loyal squire. They rode through a land cloaked in winter frost, the air sharp and clean in their lungs. Kay was full of nervous excitement, dreaming of the glory he might win. Arthur was simply happy to be there, to see the bright banners and the pavilions of the great lords, a world so different from his quiet country life. On the morning of the tournament, as they were preparing, Sir Kay realized with a great cry of frustration that he had left his sword back at the inn. He turned to Arthur, his face flushed. "Go back, Wart, and fetch my sword! Ride as fast as you can!" Arthur, ever eager to help, nodded and ran to the stables. He galloped back through the bustling streets, but when he reached their lodgings, the doors were locked and barred. Everyone was at the tournament. Arthur felt a pang of despair. Kay would be shamed, unable to compete. He could not let his brother down. Dejected, he rode back towards the tournament grounds. As he passed the quiet churchyard, he saw it. The stone, the anvil, the sword. He had heard the stories, of course, but he paid them little mind. It was just a sword and a stone, and he needed a sword for Kay. No one was around. The yard was deserted. A gentle, hopeful thought bloomed in his mind. Perhaps. He slid from his horse and walked towards it. The sword seemed to hum softly, a low, sweet note that only he could hear. It seemed to glow with a warm, welcoming light. He saw the golden letters, but they held no great meaning for him. He was not trying to become a king. He was just trying to help his brother. He reached out and wrapped his young, strong hands around the hilt. It felt as if it had been made for his grip alone. He gave a gentle, easy pull, and the sword slid from the stone and anvil as smoothly as if from a sheath of water. There was no great sound, no clap of thunder, just a profound silence, as the world held its breath. The sword in his hand felt light, perfectly balanced, and it shone with the pure, clean light of the morning sun. Arthur looked at it, amazed at how easily it had come free. He smiled, relieved. Now Kay would have a sword for the tournament. He ran back to his brother, holding the beautiful weapon aloft. "Kay, I couldn't get into the inn, so I found this one in a churchyard. It will do just as well, won't it?" Sir Kay stared at the sword. He recognized it at once from the stories that were on everyone's lips. His eyes went wide, and for a moment a flicker of ambition crossed his face. He took the sword and went to his father, Sir Ector. "Father," he said, his voice trembling, "look, I have the sword from the stone. I must be the king." Sir Ector, a wise and honest man, looked from the sword to his son's flushed face. He knew Kay's heart. He looked at him sternly and said, "How did you come by this sword?" Kay faltered, and his gaze dropped. "Arthur brought it to me," he mumbled. Sir Ector turned to Arthur, his eyes full of a dawning wonder he could barely comprehend. "Arthur," he said, his voice gentle, "how did you do this?" "I just pulled it out," Arthur said simply. Kay needed a sword. Sir Ector led them back to the churchyard. He made Arthur place the sword back into the stone. It slid in perfectly and stood there, as immovable as before. "Now," said Sir Ector to Kay, "pull it out." Kay tried. He pulled with all his might, his knuckles white, but the sword was once again part of the stone. "Now, you, Arthur," Sir Ector said, his voice thick with emotion. Arthur once again placed his hands on the hilt. And once again, with no effort at all, the sword slid free. At that moment, Sir Ector and Sir Kay both knelt before him in the quiet churchyard. "My lord," Sir Ector said, bowing his head. Arthur was bewildered. "Father, why are you kneeling? Please, get up. I am your son." "I am not your father," Sir Ector said, his eyes filled with tears of both sorrow and pride. "You are of a much higher blood than I, and now I see you are to be our king." Word spread like wildfire. The great lords and knights who had struggled so mightily refused to believe that a simple, unknown boy could be their king. They were angry and proud. They made Arthur put the sword back, and they tried again, each one convinced he could succeed where the boy had. But the sword would not yield to any of them. It would yield only to Arthur. Time and again he drew it forth with gentle ease. As he stood there, the sword in his hand, a great light seemed to shine from him, a light of goodness and quiet strength. The common people who had gathered to watch saw not an arrogant lord, but a humble boy with a kind face. They saw the truth in him, and they began to cheer. Their voices rose, a great wave of hope and joy, shouting, "Arthur is our king! We will have Arthur for our king!" The lords, seeing the love of the people for the boy, and faced with the undeniable magic of the sword, finally relented. They knelt, one by one, their pride giving way to wonder, and swore their allegiance. And so Arthur, the boy who had grown up with the animals and the trees as his friends, who had learned his lessons from Merlin in the guise of a fish and a hawk, was crowned High King of all Britain. He stood before his people, not with the fire of Uther in his eyes, but with the calm, steady light of a new day. The land, which had been groaning in turmoil, seemed to sigh in relief. The long winter of its discontent was over. Spring had come at last, in the form of a boy king with a pure heart and a sword named Excalibur, which shone with the promise of a golden age. Arthur's first act as king was not to wage war or to build monuments to himself, but to listen. He sat for hours, listening to the troubles of the small folk, the farmers and the craftspeople, whose voices had been lost in the clamor of the lords. He judged with a wisdom that seemed far beyond his years, a wisdom born not of law books, but of the empathy Merlin had taught him. He knew what it was to be small and overlooked, and so he made sure that no one in his kingdom would ever feel that way again. But a king, even one chosen by magic, could not rule alone. The land was still wild, and shadows lingered in the dark corners of the forests and the hearts of men. Merlin, ever his guide, came to him one day as Arthur stood on a high hill, looking out over his domain. "The sword you drew from the stone is a great symbol," Merlin said, his voice like the wind in the standing stones. "But a kingdom is not held by a symbol alone. It is held by fellowship. You must gather the best knights of this land, not to be your subjects, but to be your brothers. You need a council of equals, where the strongest and the weakest have the same voice." Arthur thought on this. He remembered his lessons as an ant, how they worked together, each one vital to the whole. "An order of knights," Arthur mused. "But how can they be equals if I am their king? At any table there is a head, a place of honor." Merlin smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Then we shall have a table that is a perfect circle, with no head and no foot, a round table, where every knight who sits there is equal in the eyes of his brothers and his king." And so the call went out. A new castle was to be built, a place of light and hope, and it would be called Camelot. And to its heart would come the greatest knights of the age, drawn not by the promise of gold or land, but by the ideal of a new kind of chivalry. Camelot rose as if from a dream. Merlin used his arts to help shape it, so that the stones seemed to sing as they were set in place. Its towers were white and slender, reaching for the sky not in arrogance but in aspiration. Banners of blue and gold snapped in the clean air, and within its walls there was music and laughter. It was a castle, built not just of stone, but of hope. And to Camelot they came. Sir Lancelot, the greatest warrior of them all, his skill with a sword like a deadly dance, but his heart gentle and courteous. Sir Gawain, Arthur's own nephew, loyal and true as the northern star, his strength waxing and waning with the sun. Sir Percival, a boy raised in the wild forests of Wales, his heart so pure and innocent that he seemed to see the world for the first time every day. Sir Galahad, Lancelot's son, who was even more perfect in his virtue. Sir Bors, Sir Bedivere, Sir Gareth, and many more, each a legend in his own right. In the center of the great hall of Camelot, the round table was placed. It was a marvel, crafted from the single, perfect trunk of an ancient oak tree, polished until it shone like dark water. Merlin had enchanted it, so that when the knights gathered, their names would appear in glowing letters of gold before their appointed seats. When they all sat for the first time, a profound sense of purpose filled the hall. Arthur did not sit at a raised dais, but among them, another brother in the circle. He looked at the faces around him, a constellation of courage and honor. "My brothers," he said, his voice clear and strong, "we are gathered here not to conquer, but to protect, not to rule, but to serve. We will be a shield for the weak, a voice for the voiceless. We will right wrongs, vanquish darkness, and bring justice and peace to this land." Our might will be used only for right. This is our vow." And one by one, the knights stood and placed their hands on the hilt of their swords, swearing the oath. A new age had begun. The Golden Age of Camelot. The stories of the Knights of the Round Table spread across the land like ripples in a pool. They rode out from Camelot on quests, their armor shining in the sun. They fought not for glory but for justice. They rescued maidens not for a reward but because it was right. They battled fearsome beasts and cruel giants that preyed on lonely villages. And they challenged unjust lords who oppressed their people. The land began to heal. Fields were planted in peace. Travelers could walk the roads without fear. Laughter was heard more often than weeping. Camelot was the heart of the kingdom, and from it pulsed a rhythm of kindness, courage, and honor. In the midst of this growing light, Arthur's own heart found its partner. He met the Lady Guinevere, daughter of King Leodegrance. She was as beautiful as a summer's morning, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of the deep blue flowers that grow in shaded woods. But her true beauty was in her spirit. She was wise and compassionate, with a grace that could soothe the fiercest of tempers and a wit that could charm the birds from the trees. When Arthur looked at Guinevere, he saw not just a beautiful woman, but the soul of Camelot itself. And when she looked at him, she saw not just a great king, but a good and gentle man. Their love was a quiet, steady flame that warmed all who came near it. Their wedding was a festival of joy that lasted for days. The whole kingdom celebrated. It seemed to seal the promise of the Golden Age. With King Arthur on the throne and Queen Guinevere by his side, it felt as though the peace of Camelot would last forever. Lancelot, the greatest knight, was made the Queen's personal champion, and a deep and noble friendship grew between the three of them, a bond that seemed as unbreakable as the walls of Camelot itself. The years that followed were like a long, beautiful dream. They were filled with grand tournaments, where knights tested their skills in friendly contests, their lances splintering on shields in a shower of harmless wood. There were great feasts in the hall of Camelot, where stories were told and songs were sung, the music of the harp weaving through the firelight. Arthur, with Guinevere and Merlin by his side, ruled with a gentle hand. The Round Table was a beacon of hope for the entire world. It was a time when it seemed that goodness was the strongest force on earth, that a dream of peace and justice could be made real. The sun always seemed to shine a little brighter on the white towers of Camelot, and the land itself seemed to breathe a long, happy sigh of contentment. It was a perfect time, a fleeting, shimmering moment of grace, a legend in the making. The Golden Age of Camelot unfolded like a magnificent tapestry, each thread a deed of courage, each color a moment of peace. The seasons turned in a gentle, predictable rhythm. Spring brought wildflowers to the meadows around Camelot. Summer ripened the fruit in the orchards. Autumn painted the forests in hues of gold and crimson, and winter wrapped the castle in a soft, quiet blanket of snow. In every season, the kingdom was at peace. The ideals of the Round Table had taken root in the land, and goodness blossomed. But even in the most perfect summer, there comes a day when the light begins to change, when the air holds a subtle hint of the autumn to come. So it was with Camelot. The knights had vanquished the obvious monsters. They had settled the petty squabbles of quarrelsome lords. The kingdom was so just and so peaceful that the great knights of the Round Table, men forged for quests and high adventure, began to feel a strange sense of restlessness. Their purpose, so clear at the beginning, had become muted. The great fire of their chivalry, which had burned so brightly against the darkness, now cast fewer shadows in a world filled with light. It was during a great Pentecost feast in the hall of Camelot that the next chapter of their destiny was revealed. The knights were all gathered at the Round Table, the candles casting a warm, flickering glow on their faces. A sense of quiet contentment filled the room. Suddenly, the great doors of the hall swung open, though no hand had touched them. A hush fell over the assembly. A sunbeam, thicker and more brilliant than any ordinary light, pierced the dimness of the hall. It moved through the room, and within it, floating in the air, was a chalice covered by a cloth of shimmering white samite. No one could see the vessel itself, but a sense of profound peace and overwhelming love emanated from it. The air grew sweet with a scent like all the flowers of spring, and a gentle, heavenly music, unlike any played by mortal hands, filled the air. The covered cup, the Holy Grail, drifted once around the round table and then vanished, leaving behind a silence deeper than any that had come before. Every knight sat stunned, his heart filled with a longing so deep and so pure it was almost painful. They had been touched by a mystery, a glimpse of heaven on earth, and the mundane world suddenly seemed pale and gray in comparison. Sir Gawain was the first to speak, his voice thick with awe. "We have been served a glimpse of a divine mystery," he declared, rising to his feet. "But we have not seen the vessel itself. I vow now I will ride for a year and a day, and I will not return to Camelot until I have looked upon the Holy Grail unveiled and clear." One by one, inspired by his words, the other knights rose and made the same vow. Sir Lancelot, Sir Percival, Sir Bors, Sir Galahad. Nearly every knight at the table pledged himself to the quest. King Arthur's heart was filled with a deep sorrow. He looked around the table at the faces of his beloved companions, his brothers, and he saw that the fellowship was about to be broken. "I am grieved," he said, his voice heavy, "for I know that this quest will take the best of you from me. Many who ride out will never return to their seats at this table. You have brought peace to this earthly kingdom, and now you seek a heavenly one. I cannot stop you, for the quest is a noble one, but I fear this is the beginning of the end of the Round Table." But the knights were consumed by the spiritual fire of the quest. Their hearts yearned for the adventure, for the ultimate test of their worth. And so, on a bright summer morning, the great company of knights rode out from Camelot. The sun glinted on their polished armor, their banners snapped in the breeze, and the people cheered them on. But for Arthur and Guinevere, watching them go, it was a bittersweet sight. The glory of Camelot was riding away, scattering to the four winds in search of a holy dream. The quest for the Holy Grail was unlike any quest the knights had undertaken before. It was not a journey across a physical landscape, but a journey into the landscape of their own souls. The forests they entered were not merely of wood and leaf, but were forests of doubt and temptation. The castles they came upon were not of stone, but of pride and despair. Each knight found that the quest was a mirror, reflecting his own strengths and, more often, his own hidden flaws. Sir Gawain, ever the courteous and worldly knight, found that his strict adherence to the codes of earthly chivalry was of no use. He was tested not on his strength in a joust, but on his humility and his faith, and he often found himself wanting. He wandered through a desolate land, realizing that his quest was for a prize he did not yet have the spiritual eyes to see. Sir Lancelot, the greatest of all earthly knights, endured the most painful journey of all. His immense skill and courage were useless here. He was haunted by his love for Queen Guinevere. It was a pure and noble love in his heart, a love of service and adoration, but it was a love devoted to a person, not to the divine ideal the Grail represented. This divided loyalty became a shadow that walked with him. He came closer than most to the Grail Chapel, but he was struck down in a faint, allowed only a brief clouded glimpse of the holy vessel, for his heart was not wholly pure. He woke up filled with a profound sadness, understanding that his earthly perfection was an obstacle to his heavenly aspirations. The quest was not for the strongest or the most famous, but for the most pure of heart. And so it was that the three knights who achieved the quest were not the ones the world might have expected. Sir Bors, a good and steady man who valued his faith above all else. Sir Percival, the innocent knight whose simple, untroubled heart saw the world with a child's wonder. And Sir Galahad, Lancelot's son, a youth who seemed to have been born for this quest alone. Galahad's journey was a path of miracles. He seemed to walk through the world untouched by its shadows. He wore no armor of steel, for his purity was his shield. He carried a sword of strange and holy power. He did not fight monsters, but rather his presence seemed to soothe them. He walked through enchanted woods, where other knights became lost for years, and the path for him was always straight and clear. Finally, Galahad, Percival, and Bors came to the mystical castle of Corbinic, the Grail Castle. There, in a chapel filled with an ethereal light, they at last beheld the Holy Grail unveiled. It was not a cup of gold and jewels, but a simple wooden vessel that seemed to contain all the light and all the sorrow and all the love in the world. As they knelt before it, they were filled with a peace that passed all understanding. Their long and weary journey was over. For Galahad, the sight was the culmination of his life's purpose. He had been born to see it, and having seen it, his spirit could no longer be contained by the earthly world. He prayed that he might pass from the world at a time of his own choosing. As he knelt there, his soul departed from his body in a blaze of light, and celestial hands were seen to carry him and the Grail up into the heavens. It was not a death, but a transcendence. The Holy Grail would not be seen again in the land of Britain. Percival, too, forsook the world and lived the rest of his days as a hermit in quiet contemplation of the beauty he had witnessed. Only Sir Bors the Steadfast returned to Camelot. He rode back alone, a solitary figure on the long road home. When he arrived, the great castle seemed quieter, emptier. The round table was full of vacant seats, each a silent memorial to a knight who would not return. Bors told his tale to a hushed court. He spoke of the wonders and the trials, of the spiritual journey, and of Galahad's ascension into heaven. When he finished, a deep melancholy settled over Camelot. The great quest was over. The highest ideal had been achieved, and in its achievement it had departed from the world. The knights who did return were changed. They were older, more weary, their eyes haunted by the things they had seen, both the wonders and their own failings. The easy fellowship of the Round Table was gone, replaced by a quiet, shared sorrow. The beautiful, simple dream of Camelot had been complicated by a brush with divinity, and the world seemed a little less magical, a little more gray now that it was over. The sun still shone on Camelot's towers, but the light seemed thinner, more fragile. The golden age was not over, not yet. But the long, slow twilight had begun. The beautiful dream was starting to fade at the edges, like a perfect flower beginning to wilt, its most vibrant colors slowly, imperceptibly, softening into memory. The return of the few questing knights marked a profound change in the spirit of Camelot. The empty chairs at the Round Table were a constant, silent reminder of the cost of their spiritual adventure. The easy laughter in the great hall became less frequent, replaced by a more somber and reflective mood. The golden afternoon of Arthur's reign was slowly, gracefully, giving way to a gentle evening. The world outside the castle walls was changing too. A new generation had been born that had never known the dark times before Arthur. They took the peace and justice of his reign for granted, and whispers of discontent began to stir, like the first cool breezes of autumn. And into this changing world, a shadow that had long been growing finally stepped into the light. It was Mordred, a knight of Arthur's court. In some tales, he was Arthur's own son, born of a fateful, unknowing encounter in the king's youth. In others, he was his nephew. But whatever his blood, his heart was a knot of ambition and resentment. He saw the melancholy that had touched the court, the weariness in the king's eyes, and he saw it as weakness, as an opportunity. He was the embodiment of the doubt that can creep into even the most perfect of dreams. Mordred began to sow seeds of discord. He spoke to the younger knights, reminding them of the glory of battle, a glory that peace had denied them. He spoke to the lords, whispering that Arthur was growing old, that his ideals were of a bygone age. He used truth and lies with equal skill, twisting every good deed into a sign of weakness, every act of mercy into a failure of strength. The most fertile ground for his poison was the deep and complex love that bound Arthur Guinevere, and Lancelot. Lancelot's devotion to the queen was the stuff of song and legend. It was a courtly, chivalrous love, a knight's adoration for his lady, but it was also a profound and powerful human love, a bond of souls that, over the long, peaceful years, had deepened into something that trembled on the edge of forbidden territory. It was a love that was both their greatest joy and their most tragic flaw. They fought against it, their nobility and their loyalty to Arthur warring with the truth of their hearts. Mordred saw this silent, noble struggle and painted it in the ugliest colors. He and his allies laid a trap, and one evening they burst in upon Lancelot and Guinevere as they spoke together, their hands clasped, their hearts in their eyes. Though they had committed no treason of the flesh, Mordred presented it as such. He accused them before the entire court, and the laws of the land, the very laws that Arthur himself had established to ensure justice, were unbending. Guinevere, the queen, was accused of treason, and the punishment was fire. Arthur's heart was shattered. He was torn between his love for his wife and his friend, and his duty to his own laws. He was the king, and the law had to be upheld. With the heaviest spirit imaginable, he consented to the sentence. But Lancelot, his heart broken by the fate of his queen and the ruin of their world, would not allow it. As Guinevere was led to the pyre, he and the knights loyal to him charged from their hiding place. They fought with a desperate fury, not for glory but for love and despair. They rescued the queen, but in the chaotic battle, several knights were slain, including the unarmed brothers of Sir Gawain. Lancelot fled with Guinevere to his castle in France, and the fellowship of the Round Table was irrevocably broken. Gawain, who had once loved Lancelot like a brother, was now consumed by a burning grief and a desire for vengeance. His relentless anger forced Arthur's hand. The king, his heart heavy as a stone, had no choice but to gather his army and pursue Lancelot across the sea. The dream of Camelot was now at war with itself. Arthur laid siege to Lancelot's castle, but his heart was not in it. He and Lancelot were two halves of the same whole, the king and his greatest champion. To fight each other was a deep and terrible wound to the soul of their kingdom. Twice, Gawain, in his rage, challenged Lancelot to single combat, and twice Lancelot defeated him, yet refused to strike a killing blow, still loving the man who now hated him. While Arthur was away in France, embroiled in this sorrowful war, Mordred made his move. He declared that Arthur had died in battle and seized the throne of Britain for himself. He was a false king, a king of shadow, and the land, which had known peace for so long, cried out in pain under his iron fist. News of this ultimate betrayal reached Arthur's camp. The war with Lancelot was forgotten in the face of this greater threat. Arthur made a sad peace with his old friend and turned his great army back towards the shores of Britain to reclaim his kingdom. Guinevere, full of remorse, retreated to a nunnery to spend the rest of her days in quiet prayer, her heart forever broken for the part she played in the ruin of the world's most beautiful dream. Arthur landed his forces at Dover, but Mordred's army was there to meet them. A terrible battle was fought on the beaches, and many good knights fell. Sir Gawain, still weak from his wounds, fought with the last of his strength before he was struck down. As he lay dying, his anger and grief washed away, and he saw the truth again. He wrote a letter to Lancelot, begging his forgiveness and asking him to come to Arthur's aid. The king wept over the body of his nephew, his sorrow now a vast gray ocean. He pushed on, his loyal knights dwindling, his heart aching with the knowledge that this was the final chapter. The armies marched west, towards the plain of Camelot, where destiny and the final battle awaited. The night before the battle, Arthur had a dream. He dreamt he was sitting on his throne, dressed in his finest robes, but the throne was tied to a great wheel. And as the wheel turned, it plunged him down into a dark water filled with serpents and monsters. He woke with a cry, his heart cold with dread. Later, as he drifted in a troubled sleep, the spirit of Gawain appeared to him, surrounded by a host of beautiful ladies. He warned Arthur not to fight Mordred on the morrow. "If you fight," the spirit whispered, "you will die, and most of your people with you. You must make a truce for a month, for in that time Lancelot will come with his army to help you." Heeding the warning, Arthur arranged a parley with Mordred. They met in the space between the two armies, each with 14 of his most trusted men. They agreed to a truce, and the treaty was about to be signed. The two armies stood watching, tense and ready, under a pale and watery sun. But fate, or perhaps the last vestiges of a dying magic, had one final, cruel trick to play. An adder, a small snake, slithered out of the heather and bit one of Mordred's knights on the foot. The knight, without thinking, drew his sword to kill the serpent. That single, small flash of polished steel was all it took. Both armies, seeing the drawn sword, believed treachery was afoot. A great cry went up from both sides, and the horns of battle sounded. The final, tragic battle of Camelot began. It was not a battle of glory. It was a slaughter born of a misunderstanding, a final, bloody testament to the breaking of their world. They fought all day, a desperate, swirling melee of mud and steel. The knights of the Round Table, brothers who had once sat together and vowed to protect the weak, now cut each other down in the misty twilight. By the end of the day, the field was silent, littered with the bodies of the fallen. A terrible quiet descended with the evening mist. Of Arthur's great host, only he and 2 of his knights, Sir Lucan and his brother Sir Bedivere, remained alive, and they were grievously wounded. Arthur, leaning heavily on Bedivere, looked out over the field of his slain knights, his heart an empty cavern of grief. And then, through the mist, he saw him. Mordred, the architect of all this ruin, standing alone, leaning on his sword amidst the dead. A last surge of kingly fire rose in Arthur. "Bedivere, give me my spear, for I see the traitor who has caused all this woe." "My lord, let him be," pleaded Bedivere. "He is cursed. If you leave him, you have won the day. Remember what the spirit of Sir Gawain told you." "My time has come," Arthur said softly. "But I will not leave this world while he still draws breath." He took his spear, and with a great cry, he ran at Mordred. Mordred, seeing him come, ran to meet him, his own sword raised. Arthur thrust his spear, and it pierced Mordred's body, clean through. But Mordred, in his final death-fueled act of malice, pushed himself up the shaft of the spear and brought his sword down on Arthur's helmet. The blow was mortal. Mordred fell dead, and Arthur, the great king, collapsed into the arms of Sir Bedivere. His life was fading, the light of his world dimming. "My loyal Bedivere," he whispered, his voice faint, "my end is near. Take my sword, Excalibur, and go to the water's edge. Throw it into the lake and then come back and tell me what you see." Bedivere took the legendary sword. Its hilt was crusted with jewels that glittered even in the gloom. He could not bring himself to throw such a treasure into the water. He hid it behind a tree and returned to the king. "What did you see?" Arthur asked. "I saw nothing but the wind on the waves." Bedivere lied. "You have not done as I commanded," Arthur said, his voice weaker still. "Go again." Bedivere went again, and again his heart failed him. He hid the sword and returned. "My lord, I saw nothing but the water lapping on the shore." "Ah, traitor," Arthur sighed. "You have betrayed me twice. Now go for a third time, for my life is almost spent. If you fail me now, I will slay you with my own hands." Shamed, Bedivere ran to the lake. This time he closed his eyes, swung the great sword in an arc, and threw it with all his might out into the center of the water. And then, a wonder. An arm, clothed in white samite, rose from the surface of the lake. A hand caught the sword by the hilt, brandished it 3 times in the air, and then drew it, slowly, majestically, back beneath the waves. Bedivere ran back to Arthur and told him what he had seen. "It is well," Arthur breathed. "Now, carry me to the water's edge. Help me, for I have grown cold." As Bedivere carried the dying king to the shore, a dark barge appeared, drifting silently out of the mist. On its deck were 3 tall queens in black hoods, their faces hidden. One of them was Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, a powerful enchantress who had often been his foe, but was now here, in the end, in sorrow. They wept as they saw the king's pale face and grievous wound. They gently lifted him from Bedivere's arms and laid him in the barge. Arthur rested his head in the lap of one of the queens. "My lord, what will become of me now that you are gone?" cried Bedivere, his heart breaking. Arthur looked at him, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Comfort yourself," he whispered, his voice now just a breath of air. "For I go now to the Vale of Avalon, to be healed of my grievous wound. Pray for my soul." The barge began to move, gliding silently across the still, dark water into the thickening mist. Bedivere watched it go, the sound of the queen's lamentations drifting back to him, until the boat and the king and the last light of his world were swallowed by the gray twilight. The dream of Camelot was over. The golden age had faded into legend, but Arthur did not die. He was taken to the magical Isle of Avalon, the Isle of Apples, and Eternal Spring, a place that is not quite in this world. There he sleeps, and there his wounds are slowly healing. And it is said that one day, when the land of Britain is in its darkest hour, when all hope seems lost, the trumpets will sound, the mist will part on the lake, and the king will return. For on his tomb it is not written, "Here lies Arthur, king that was." Instead, the words read, "Hic iacet Arthurus, rex quandam, rexque futurus." Here lies Arthur, the once and future king. And so, the story ends, but it does not truly end. It sleeps, just as the king sleeps, waiting for the time when the world needs him again. The great adventure is over, but the memory of it, the beautiful, poignant dream of Camelot, of a time when kindness was strength and justice was the law, that memory lingers on, a soft and gentle light in the long, quiet night. It is a story to hold in your heart, a promise whispered on the wind, a lullaby of a golden time, and the hope of a golden dawn yet to come. Now, close your eyes and sleep, and perhaps, in your own dreams, you will see the shimmer of a white tower, hear the faint notes of a harp, and feel the peace of Avalon.